"Why are you moving my daughter's table?" Caleb Brooks asked as Meredith Collins shoved the folding table sideways and a glass drink jar tipped toward a first grader. Caleb dropped to one knee, caught the jar against his forearm, and let half the cinnamon maple cakes slide onto the gym floor. Ruby clutched her late mother's yellowed recipe card against her chest. Across the room, CO Victoria Lane bit into one surviving cake and froze. "Dad," Ruby whispered. "She's staring at Mom's handwriting." 3 hours earlier, Caleb had stood beneath the hard fluorescent light of his apartment kitchen, tying the faded brown apron behind his back while the last batch cooled beside the sink. The room smelled of cinnamon, browned butter, and the faint burnt sugar scent trapped inside the old wooden recipe box that had belonged to his wife. Ruby sat at the table in her school sweatshirt, carefully tracing the prices onto a poster board with a purple marker. She had drawn a small red heart beside the words Brooks Family Cinnamon Maple Cakes. "Mom always made the heart crooked," she said. Caleb glanced at the recipe card propped against the flour tin. One corner bore a crescent-shaped burn mark, and 3 blue curves sat beneath the words fold. "Don't stir." "Then crooked is right," he said. He packed the cakes into plain white boxes, placed the card inside the wooden box, and counted the bills in his wallet twice. The bake sale money was supposed to help with Ruby's overdue after-school fee, but there was not enough batter for mistakes and no money for another batch. At the elementary school gym, polished floors squeaked beneath sneakers and folding tables formed bright rows under paper banners. Wealthier parents arrived with printed menus, matching aprons, and rented display stands. Caleb carried his boxes himself while Ruby held the wooden recipe box with both arms. Meredith greeted them with the smooth smile she used when other parents were watching. "Mr. Brooks, your assigned space has been adjusted," she said, pointing toward a dim corner near the equipment room doors. Caleb looked at the posted floor plan. Ruby's name was still taped over a table in the main row. "This says, Table 14. Meredith lowered her voice. "Prime placement reflects contribution level. I'm sure you understand." Caleb noticed the children moving behind her before he answered. He moved his own boxes aside so they would not trip, then said, "We'll use the space we were given." Meredith's smile tightened. "I'm trying to keep this professional." "So am I." When she grabbed the table and dragged it from the marked position, one leg caught on a strip of blue floor tape. The table jerked. The jar tipped. Caleb caught it before it struck the child, but the cakes hit the floor in soft, heavy thuds. For a breath, the gym seemed to pause. Ruby stared at the ruined cakes, her mouth pressed tight. Caleb checked the first grader's hands and knees before looking at anything else. "You hurt." The boy shook his head. Caleb picked up one untouched cake from the sealed box. "Take this. One for your sister too." Meredith glanced toward the sponsor's banner. "We cannot hand out food without recording sales." Caleb wiped cinnamon from his palm onto his towel. "Then record it as kindness." Angela Brown helped Ruby recover the wooden box, but the recipe card had slipped free. Victoria Lane, standing beside the Lane Foods display, received a cake Angela had rescued before the fall. She took one bite, then turned the piece over slowly, studying its thin, folded layers. Her gaze moved from the cake to the card in Ruby's hands. She did not smile. She did not accuse anyone. She simply stopped breathing for half a second. Caleb saw it. Then he saw something else. Victoria was not looking at the recipe's date or the handwriting. She was staring at the 3 blue curves beneath the word fold as though they were a signature no one else in the room was supposed to recognize. Victoria's eyes remained fixed on the 3 blue curves beneath the word fold, but before she could ask a question, the sharp click of dress shoes crossed the gym floor. "Mr. Brooks," Principal Harold Finch said, "could we speak privately? Ruby stays where I can see her. Of course, we're here to support families." His smile was gentle enough for the parents nearby, yet the manila envelope in his hand had Caleb's name printed across the front in red. The fluorescent lights reflected off its plastic window as Harold lowered his voice just enough to pretend discretion. "There is still an outstanding balance for Ruby's after-school program." A mother arranging cupcakes 2 tables away stopped moving. Another parent looked down at Caleb's worn shirt cuffs, then at the cakes scattered across the floor. Ruby slid one sneaker behind the other, hiding the peeling rubber at the toe. Caleb noticed. He stepped half a pace in front of her without making it obvious. "That account is between the school and me," he said. Harold's expression did not change. "Naturally. But participation privileges can become complicated when financial obligations remain unresolved. She was invited to this event. No one is excluding her." The words were polite. The envelope stayed visible. Then a man in a charcoal suit lifted one of the sealed cakes with 2 fingers, as if it might stain him. Nathan Cole's silver Lane Foods badge caught the gym lights when he turned the package toward the corporate banner. "This is not just a school matter," he said. "This product appears to reproduce our original cinnamon maple fold." Caleb looked at him. Ruby looked at the recipe card. Victoria looked at Nathan. For a moment, the only sound was a basketball rolling somewhere behind the bleachers. "You tasted one bite," Caleb said. "I know our intellectual property. Then you know evidence should be handled carefully." Nathan gave a patient smile meant for difficult people. "Mr. Brooks, I understand that small home bakers are not always familiar with licensing rules." His gaze moved over Caleb's faded apron. The flour caught in the seams, the towel tucked at his waist. "Intent is not always the issue." 2 parents whispered near the raffle table. One used the word copycat. Ruby's fingers tightened around the card until the paper bowed slightly near the crescent-shaped burn. Caleb crouched beside her and gently flattened the edge with his thumb. "Hold it by the corners, baby girl," he said. "Mom said not to bend it." "I know. You didn't do anything wrong." Ruby nodded, but her eyes stayed on the floor. Nathan opened a leather folder and removed a printed notice. "To protect the school, the remaining product should be surrendered and sales should stop immediately." "Surrendered to whom?" "Lane Foods can preserve it." "No," Harold cleared his throat. "Caleb, cooperation would help keep this from becoming unpleasant." Caleb rose slowly. He did not raise his voice. He did not step toward Nathan. He simply took the notice, read the first page, then the second, while the smell of cinnamon and floor polish hung between them. "Angela Brown witnesses 1 sealed cake," he said. "Marco Ruiz signs the label. The school keeps it in its kitchen freezer. Nobody from Lane Foods removes it." Nathan's smile thinned. "That is unnecessary. Then it should not be a problem." Victoria shifted her attention from the recipe card to Nathan. "Why did you call it the original fold?" she asked. Nathan glanced toward her. "Because that is what the product is. The packaging calls it layered cinnamon cake. Internally, we use more precise language. That phrase has not appeared in a public file," Victoria said. Nathan closed the folder. "I have worked with the brand for 20 years. I recognize what belongs to us." Caleb handed the notice back without signing the surrender line. "I'll stop selling until this is reviewed," he said. "But you don't take my wife's card, and you don't take my daughter's name off this table." Harold's pleasant expression tightened at the edges. "No one is removing her name." Behind him, Meredith quietly peeled the Brooks label from the center row table and folded it into her palm. Angela saw her do it. So did Victoria. Caleb moved Ruby beside Angela before signing only the line confirming receipt of the notice. Then Ruby turned the recipe card over, checking for her mother's name. A date in faded blue ink showed beneath her thumb. Victoria leaned closer. The year was 6 years earlier than Lane Foods had launched its best-selling cinnamon maple cake, and Nathan had just called the technique by a name only someone familiar with the original recipe should have known. Victoria kept her eyes on the faded date while the gym noise slowly returned around them. 6 years, she said almost to herself. That card predates the product by 6 years. Nathan adjusted the cuff of his suit. Dates can be added later. So can accusations, Caleb said. Then he turned away before the exchange could become something Ruby would remember for the wrong reason. One of the younger students near the raffle table had gone pale. The boy stood very still, one hand pressed to his stomach while the adults around him kept arguing about labels, liability, and ownership. Angela noticed him a second after Caleb did. "Eli?" she called. "Did you eat breakfast?" The boy shook his head. His lower lip trembled, more frightened by the attention than by the dizziness. Angela reached for her phone. "The nurse is across campus. I'll call her." Caleb looked at the 2 sealed cakes that had not touched the floor. One was supposed to remain available for an independent comparison. The other had been set aside for Ruby to take home. "Any nut allergy?" he asked. Angela checked the emergency card clipped inside her event folder. "No nuts. He gets lightheaded when he skips meals." Caleb read the ingredients aloud from the recipe card, slow enough for Angela to verify each one. Then he broke Ruby's cake into small pieces, placed them on a clean napkin, and crouched beside the boy. "Small bites," he said. "No rus." "Is that the evidence?" Nathan asked. "One sample is already sealed," Caleb replied. "And the other?" Caleb held the napkin steady while Eli took the first bite. "The other is food." Nathan exhaled through his nose as if patience had become a burden. "You are making this more difficult than it needs to be." Caleb did not answer. He watched the color return gradually to the boy's face. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the sharp smell of floor cleaner mixed with cinnamon from the broken cakes. Ruby stood beside her father, looking at the empty space where her cake had been. For one brief second, disappointment crossed her face. Then she pushed the water bottle closer to Eli. "You can have the rest," she said. "Dad can make me another one someday." Caleb looked at her, and the ache behind his ribs arrived without warning. His wife had once said the same thing when money was tight and Ruby was too young to remember. "We can make more someday." He had not been able to save her from every disappointment that came after, but he could still teach their daughter that scarcity did not have to make a person small. When the nurse arrived and confirmed Eli was stable, Caleb folded the stained towel over the broken cakes and began cleaning the floor himself. Meredith watched from beside the sponsor table. "Custodial staff can handle that," she said. "They have enough to do," Caleb replied. He wiped cinnamon from the blue tape marking Ruby's original space, then straightened the crooked sign she had made that morning. Meredith gave Victoria a faint, apologetic smile. "He means well. Some people just don't understand how formal events operate." Victoria said nothing. She had seen Caleb surrender the last cake his daughter expected to take home. She had also seen him refuse to make an audience of the kindness. That did not prove the recipe belonged to his wife, but it changed the shape of the man Nathan wanted everyone to distrust. Angela helped Ruby lift the old wooden recipe box off the floor. Its lid had shifted during the fall, and Caleb noticed a folded piece of paper caught beneath the loose lining. He set the box on the table, brushed flour from the hinge, and carefully lifted the paper free. It was an envelope, yellowed at the folds, with the Old Lane Foods logo printed in the upper corner. Caleb's name was nowhere on it. His wife's was. Ruby touched the crescent-shaped burn along the edge. "That was with Mom's card," she said. Caleb opened the envelope just far enough to read the first line. It invited his wife to a product demonstration and employment assessment at Lane Foods. The instructions asked her to bring one written formula and one prepared sample. At the bottom, beside the visitor code and appointment time, was the name of the contact who had scheduled the meeting, N. Cole. Caleb lifted his eyes toward Nathan, but the man was already telling Harold that old emails were easy to fabricate. Marco Ruiz, standing behind them, stared at the visitor code instead. His face changed before he spoke. "I worked that assessment week," he said quietly. "And after it ended, someone ordered every visitor log pulled from the front desk." Marco's words did not make the gym louder. They made it quieter. Nathan turned toward him with a measured expression, the kind people used when they wanted irritation to look like professionalism. "Visitor logs are routinely archived," he said. "There is nothing unusual about that." "Pulled from the front desk," Marco replied. "Not archived." Harold stepped between them slightly, palms open. "Let's not turn a school event into speculation." Caleb folded the old email along its original crease and slid it back into the envelope. The paper crackled softly in his hands. Around them, parents had begun pretending to return to their tables while listening to every word. Victoria looked from Marco to Nathan, then down at the mended wooden box. The invitation proves Mrs. Brooks was scheduled to visit Lane Foods, she said. It does not prove she attended, presented this formula, or that the card predates our internal work. Her tone was even, fair. Caleb respected that more than sympathy. Then check it, he said. Nathan gave a small laugh. Based on an old envelope found under a box lining? Based on whatever the records say. And if the records show you had access to our product later? Caleb met his eyes. Then say that too. The answer made Victoria pause. Nathan had expected denial, not permission. What access? She asked. Nathan turned to her. Mr. Brooks worked at a packaging facility connected to one of our distributors after the product launched. It is entirely possible he saw internal materials. The words moved through the room like cold air under a door. Meredith's face softened with practiced concern. That would explain so much, she murmured. Ruby looked up at Caleb. Did you work there? For 11 weeks, he said. Night shift. Loading sealed cartons. He did not lower his voice. I never entered product development, and I never used their computer system. Nathan spread one hand. That is his account. Caleb glanced toward Victoria. Check the access logs. Check my supervisor. Check the dates. Dad, Ruby said softly, touching the recipe card. Mom had this before that job. I know. It already had the burned corner. Caleb nodded. Her memory was simple but exact. She remembered seeing the card near the stove when she was little, always with the same crescent-shaped mark at the top. Victoria asked her assistant to contact Lane Foods Records and request the archived material linked to the visitor code. Nathan objected immediately. That will require legal review. Then legal can review it. We should not expose proprietary files in a public gym. No one asked you to display them here. His mouth closed. The first digital file arrived 20 minutes later on Victoria's tablet. It was a scanned recipe page with no name across the top. The text had been cropped so closely that part of the first line was missing. Nathan stood beside Victoria, explaining that old scans were often incomplete. Caleb did not move closer until she turned the screen toward him. Is that your wife's handwriting? She asked. Some of it looks like hers. Some, Meredith repeated, almost relieved. Caleb leaned over the tablet without touching it. The gym lights reflected across the glass, hiding the lower half of the page. He tilted the device toward the shadow cast by the sponsor banner. The glare slipped away. 3 blue curves appeared beneath the word fold. Near the upper edge, just below the crop line, sat a dark crescent stain. Ruby held the original card beside the screen. The burn mark lined up. The curves lined up. Even the spacing between 2 ingredients matched. Victoria's breathing slowed, but she did not declare anything. This is significant, she said. It is not conclusive. Nathan recovered quickly. Exactly. If Mr. Brooks saw this scan during his packaging work, he could have recreated the card later. Caleb studied the file information printed beneath the image. When was it scanned? No one answered at first. Victoria enlarged the metadata. The date appeared in small black numbers. It had been uploaded to Lane Foods archive almost 6 years before Caleb ever worked at the packaging facility, and 18 months before the company launched the product. Nathan stepped closer to the tablet. Metadata can migrate during system transfers. Can file names migrate too? Caleb asked. Victoria looked at the revision history. The original file name had been a visitor code matching the email in Caleb's hand. 3 weeks after the scan, someone had renamed it Internal Development Formula. The change came from an asset number assigned to Nathan's office computer. Nathan reached toward the screen, then stopped before touching it. That does not establish who was sitting at the machine. Caleb placed the original card beside the tablet, aligning the burn mark with the scanned image. Maybe not, he said. But why was my wife's visitor code turned into your internal formula? Why was my wife's visitor code turned into your internal formula? Caleb asked. The question stayed between them while the gym's ventilation system pushed cold air through the paper banners overhead. Nathan glanced at the parents gathering near the tables, then lowered his voice. This is exactly why technical matters should be handled privately. Then test it privately, Caleb said. But test both sides. Victoria placed the tablet flat against the table. Her fingertips rested beside the metadata without covering it. What kind of test? Marco Ruiz looked from the scanned recipe to the sealed cake in the school freezer container. A controlled bake. Same ingredients. 2 methods. Continuous video. Nathan's expression remained courteous. A school kitchen is not a laboratory. It does not need to be, Marco replied. We are not proving ownership. We are proving whether that card produces the structure in our archived pre-launch sample. The word pre-launch made Nathan's jaw tighten for half a second. Caleb noticed, but he did not point it out. He looked instead at Ruby, who stood beside Angela with both hands around the wooden recipe box. The child had stopped hiding her shoes. You okay doing this? He asked. Ruby nodded. Can I read Mom's words? Only when they ask you. You stay outside the tape. The small school kitchen smelled of sanitizer, warm metal, and the cinnamon still clinging to Caleb's apron. Angela placed her phone on a shelf where the camera could see the counter, oven, ingredients, and everyone's hands. Marco purchased flour, butter, eggs, maple syrup, and spices from 3 different bake sale booths. Each receipt was signed by Harold, Angela, and Victoria before the bags were opened. Nathan stood near the doorway with his arms folded. This is becoming theater, he said. Caleb washed his hands, dried them on a paper towel, and waited until Marco confirmed the camera was recording. No shortcuts, Caleb said. No ingredients from my boxes. Agreed, Victoria replied. And the original card stays with Ruby. Agreed. Then we bake. Caleb measured without flourish. He leveled the flour with the back of a butter knife, warmed the butter just enough to soften it, and mixed the cinnamon into the maple syrup until the surface shone under the fluorescent lights. Marco divided the batter into 2 stainless steel bowls. One would follow the card. The other would be stirred using the company's current standard method. When they reached the line marked by 3 blue curves, Ruby read quietly from outside the tape. Fold 3 times. Turn the bowl. Don't press the air out. Caleb slipped the spatula beneath the batter and lifted it over itself once, twice, 3 times. He rotated the bowl and stopped. No speech. No claim of genius. Just the careful movement of someone repeating what he had been taught at a kitchen table years before. Nathan stepped forward. That technique is common. Marco did not look up. Not with this hydration level. You are encouraging people to misunderstand routine product development. Then the result should clear it up. The oven fan clicked on. For 19 minutes, nothing happened except the quiet sounds of waiting. The buzz of the lights, the camera timer, Ruby rubbing one thumb over the edge of the wooden box. Caleb used the time to wipe the counter and place the receipts inside a clear plastic sleeve. When Angela's phone battery warning appeared, he connected it to a wall charger without stopping the recording. Nathan watched him do it, and his eyes narrowed. The first tray emerged pale gold. The control batch had a smooth, even crumb. The batch made from the card opened in thin folded layers, with a darker ribbon of cinnamon maple running through the center. Marco removed a frozen archival sample from an insulated Lane Foods case and sliced it beside Caleb's cake. The layers matched closely enough that the parents watching through the kitchen window stopped whispering. Even the scrape of a folding chair across the gym floor ended halfway through. Victoria set down the legal folder she had been holding. That proves the card can produce the early structure, she said. It does not yet prove where the card came from. Caleb nodded. Then don't say more than it proves. Nathan leaned over the tray, and the professional calm slipped before he could catch it. That's the pre-launch texture. Marco slowly raised his head. You named a version nobody here was told existed. Nathan recovered, smoothing his tie. I supervised brand development. Of course, I recognize historical iterations. Then you were involved earlier than you said, Victoria replied. Nathan's smile returned, thinner now. I said this should be handled through proper channels. It will be. Victoria turned to her assistant. Suspend deletion permissions on every file connected to this product. Preserve Mr. Cole's account exactly as it is. She did not remove him from his position. Not yet. But the room felt different after the order. Ruby moved closer to Caleb, no longer frightened enough to hide behind his arm. He wrapped the clean towel around the warm loaf and handed it to Marco, not the crowd. Seal it, he said. Nobody needs to taste victory before the facts are finished. At that moment, Victoria's assistant returned from the records office holding an old paper ledger inside a clear evidence sleeve. The binding was cracked. Dust clung to the spine. She opened it to the date printed on the invitation, then stopped. The page containing Caleb's wife's visitor code had been torn cleanly from the book, leaving only a narrow strip of paper, and one line of blue ink still attached to the binding. The torn page rested inside the clear evidence sleeve like a wound someone had tried to make look clean. Only a narrow strip remained in the binding, and across it ran one line of blue ink. Victoria's assistant angled the ledger beneath the fluorescent light. The visitor code is gone, she said. But the last 4 digits of the appointment time are still here.
Marco leaned closer.
They match the invitation. Nathan took out his phone. This has gone far enough for a school fundraiser. Caleb looked at the jagged paper fibers, then at the old envelope in his hand. Whoever tore it out left the part they thought didn't matter. The gym's printer stopped humming in the office beyond the kitchen. For a few seconds, the building seemed to hold its breath. Victoria asked the records team to search for any document created from the missing visitor entry. Caleb did not demand that they call the police or announce Nathan's guilt. He packed the original card, invitation, and signed receipts back into the wooden box, each item separated by clean sheets of paper. We need something outside his office, he said. Something he couldn't rename. Ruby watched from beside Angela, her fingers curled around the box handle. Mom kept taxi papers, she said. She said they helped with taxes. It was the kind of memory a 9-year-old would carry because it came from watching an adult sort envelopes at the kitchen table. Caleb's eyes shifted toward the crescent burn on the invitation. The mark had not come from the bake sale accident. It had come from the old stove in their apartment, years before his wife died, when she had kept every important paper in the same box. He asked Angela to stay with Ruby and drove home only after Victoria's independent counsel documented every item remaining at the school. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator motor and traffic moving below the window. Caleb knelt on the kitchen floor, opened the box beneath the sink where his wife had kept receipts, and searched without tearing anything apart. Near the bottom, clipped to an insurance statement, he found a faded taxi receipt. Lane Foods' corporate address was printed beneath the driver number. The arrival time matched the invitation. The pickup time came 2 hours and 47 minutes later. When Caleb returned, Nathan was trying to persuade Victoria to continue the review at company headquarters. Sensitive materials should not be handled in public, he said. Neither should accusations against a child's family, Caleb replied. He placed the taxi receipt beneath the clear sleeve, not in Victoria's hand. The law firm verified the cab company's archived trip record. It confirmed the route, but Nathan remained composed. A ride to the building does not prove she entered product development. He's right, Victoria said. Caleb nodded. Then keep going. That answer changed her expression more than anger would have. The insurance department found the next link. On the afternoon listed on the receipt, a false fire alarm had forced everyone on the 3rd floor of Lane Foods to evacuate. The company's regular camera files had expired years ago, but its insurer had retained the incident report. A printer in the school office began feeding out pages. Names appeared in narrow columns. Employees, contractors, visitors. Caleb's wife was listed under the same visitor code as the invitation. Nathan Cole was listed on the same floor. Then came a grainy safety photograph taken outside the building. Caleb's wife stood near the curb, one arm around the wooden recipe box Ruby now held. The diagonal scratch across its lid was visible even through the faded image. Nathan stood several feet behind her, speaking to a security officer. Ruby touched the same scratch with one fingertip. "That's our box," she said. Caleb swallowed once. He had known his wife went to an interview. He had not known she had carried the recipe into a room where people later erased her name. Victoria requested the internal delivery records from that afternoon. A courier slip showed Nathan had sent a sealed packet from recruiting to the legal department less than an hour after everyone returned inside. The packet number matched an archived legal file, but the page describing authorship was missing. Only the routing cover remained. Nathan loosened his tie, then retightened it. Old files lose pages. Not usually the page that decides who owns something, Marco said. Victoria's phone vibrated. Her counsel had found something else. The same recruiting program had produced. For other files whose applicant names were later replaced with internal project labels. None had become products as successful as the Brooks recipe, but the pattern was no longer a single clerical mistake. Victoria looked through the gym's glass doors at the sponsor banner carrying her company's name. "This may be larger than one formula," she said. Nathan stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Victoria, we should discuss institutional exposure privately." Caleb heard the shift. Nathan had stopped speaking like a brand director and started speaking like a man protecting himself. Victoria offered Caleb an interim payment while the investigation continued. He looked at Ruby, then at the torn ledger page, the taxi receipt, the evacuation photograph, and the empty space where his wife's authorship should have been. "Make the record honest first," he said. "Then we can talk about money." The independent attorney traced the courier packet to an off-site storage index. Beside its number was a second code, one used for recorded legal conferences. The corresponding recording box had not been destroyed. It had been moved to a warehouse across town, still sealed under Nathan Cole's name. And by then, too many parents, teachers, and cameras had seen the evidence for the truth to disappear behind a closed office door. By the time the folding chairs were arranged in straight rows across the school gym, the bake sale banners had stopped looking cheerful. Their paper letters hung above a long table where the evidence had been placed in clear sleeves. The yellowed recipe card, the Old Lane Foods invitation, the signed ingredient receipts, the taxi record, the insurance report, and the grainy evacuation photograph of Caleb's wife holding the scratched wooden box. Parents stood along the walls beneath the basketball hoops. Teachers gathered near the bleachers. No children had been asked to sit through the legal discussion. Ruby remained beside Angela at the edge of the stage, close enough to hold Caleb's hand but protected from the cameras by the teacher's body. Caleb wore the same faded brown apron. Cinnamon still marked one cuff. He did not enter like a man who had already won. He entered like a father who had spent the entire day making sure the truth would not cost his daughter more than the lie already had. Meredith Collins stepped to the microphone before Victoria could begin. "This school values every family," she said, her voice warm and carefully measured. "What occurred today was an unfortunate misunderstanding arising from a private commercial dispute." Harold stood behind her with his hands folded over the manila envelope that had exposed Ruby's unpaid fee. Nathan waited beside his attorney, composed again, his silver company badge removed from his jacket. "No one intended to embarrass anyone," Meredith continued. "The table was moved for safety and sponsor coordination." Angela looked toward the floor plan still taped to the wall. Caleb did too. He said nothing yet. Victoria stood near the evidence table, not behind the microphone. She had the authority to end the discussion, but she waited. She wanted each person to commit to a version of the truth before the final record arrived. Nathan's attorney spoke next. "Lane Foods acknowledges that Mrs. Brooks may have attended an employment assessment many years ago. Attendance, however, does not establish ownership. Recipes evolve. Similar techniques appear independently. Mr. Brooks also worked in a facility linked to a company distributor." A murmur passed through the adults. For a moment, the explanation seemed to restore the old balance. It was neat, legal, plausible enough for anyone who wanted the discomfort to end. Nathan lifted his chin slightly. We are prepared to handle this compassionately and privately. Caleb looked toward Ruby. She was holding the wooden box against her stomach, one finger resting on the diagonal scratch visible in the insurance photograph. He stepped to the microphone only when Victoria nodded. My wife's pain is not evidence, he said. My daughter's embarrassment is not evidence. So we won't use either one. The room settled. Use the records. Victoria began with the recipe card. She placed its enlarged image on the projection screen. The crescent burn, the 3 blue curves, the date written 6 years before the commercial launch. Then she displayed the invitation carrying the matching visitor code and Nathan's name as the contact. Nathan's attorney rose immediately. An invitation proves only that a meeting was scheduled. Correct, Victoria said. The second image appeared. The taxi receipt, followed by the insurer's evacuation list. Caleb's wife's name appeared under the same visitor code. The grainy photograph followed, showing her outside Lane Foods with the scratched wooden box. Ruby leaned toward Angela and whispered, "That's Mom's box." The words were quiet, but the microphone near the evidence table caught them. No one asked her to explain further. Nathan's attorney remained calm. That proves she entered the building. It does not establish what was in the box. For a second time, the defense seemed to hold. Nathan placed both hands flat on the table, his confidence returning. Exactly. This has been turned into a story because people want a villain. Caleb looked at him. Then let the next record decide whether there is one. Victoria displayed the metadata from the scanned formula. The visitor code had been changed to internal development formula from a computer assigned to Nathan's office. The screen then showed Angela's uninterrupted video of the controlled bake, the independent ingredient receipts, and the 2 comparison loaves. Marco explained the matching pre-launch structure without claiming legal ownership. Nathan's attorney seized the opening. Technical similarity still does not establish theft. Mr. Cole supervised early development and naturally recognized historical versions. He recognized one before anyone told him which version we made, Marco replied. Nathan's mouth tightened. That proves experience, not wrongdoing. Victoria did not argue. She displayed the next item instead. A message from Nathan to a legal employee reading, "Remove applicant identifiers until ownership is cleared." His attorney stood again. That language supports our position. Identifiers were temporarily removed pending review. The gym shifted. A few parents glanced toward the doors as though the case had reached an unsatisfying but reasonable end. Then Caleb looked at the projected dates. When was the review opened? He asked. Nathan's attorney paused. Victoria answered. It wasn't. When was the product filed? For days after that message. A chair leg stopped halfway across the polished floor. Harold's fingers tightened around the envelope. Caleb faced Nathan without raising his voice. You called it temporary. What happened in those 4 days that made her name unnecessary? Nathan looked toward Victoria rather than Caleb. This is no longer an appropriate public proceeding. You made it public when you called him a thief beside his daughter, Victoria said. She then displayed the original booth map. Ruby's table was clearly marked in the main row. Angela confirmed that Meredith had removed the label only after Nathan's accusation. Harold was required to acknowledge that discussing Ruby's unpaid fee before other parents violated school confidentiality policy. Meredith's practiced smile disappeared, though she continued insisting every decision had been made to protect the event. Caleb did not ask for an apology. He rested one hand over Ruby's on the wooden box. I'm not here to bury anyone, he said. I'm here because somebody already tried to bury her name. At the rear doors, an independent records officer entered carrying a gray archive box inside a tamper-evident bag. Dust marked the cardboard. The seal was unbroken. A white label on the side bore the courier packet number, the date of the legal meeting, and Nathan Cole's name. The officer set it on the evidence table and placed a digital recorder beside it. Victoria looked at Nathan once, then at the waiting room. This recording will tell us whether an applicant's name was removed for review, she said, or because someone believed she was too powerless to object. The attorney checked the seal. The camera light turned red. And as the officer slid a blade beneath the evidence tape, Nathan's hand moved toward the edge of the table as if he could still stop the box from opening. The seal split with a dry crack that carried across the gym. The records officer lifted the gray lid, removed a cassette-sized legal recorder, and read the identification number into the microphone before pressing play. At first there was only tape hiss, the faint scrape of chairs, and a distant office phone ringing. Then Nathan Cole's younger voice filled the speakers. The applicant refused the assignment clause. Another man asked, "Then we return the formula, correct?" Paper shifted near the recorder. Nathan answered, calm and unmistakable. "She has no counsel, no industry backing, and no money to pursue this. Type the recipe into the internal template. Remove the applicant identifiers and protect the brand." The gym went still before the recording had even finished. The projector fan became suddenly loud. A cell phone vibrated against a metal chair, and no one reached to silence it. On the screen behind Victoria, the message "Remove applicant identifiers until ownership is cleared" glowed above the date the product had been filed, 4 days after the meeting. Nathan's attorney stood slowly. "We need to verify context." The records officer raised one hand. "The seal number matches the courier index. The meeting date matches the routing slip. The attendee list is inside the box." She removed a folded sheet and placed it beneath the document camera. Nathan's name appeared first. Beside it was the young attorney who had objected on the recording. A second audio segment played. The attorney's voice was sharper now. "At minimum, preserve the authorship page." Nathan replied, "Preserve it if you want. It does not leave this department attached to her name." Victoria did not move. Her face had lost the polished stillness she had worn all afternoon. She looked at the recipe card beneath the glass, then at the evacuation photograph, the taxi receipt, the visitor invitation, the scanned formula with the cropped top line, and finally at Nathan. The chain no longer contained a gap wide enough for him to hide inside. Nathan reached for his water. The paper cup bent slightly in his grip. "That was a preliminary legal discussion," he said. His voice came out dry. "The product was substantially developed afterward." Marco slid the controlled bake photographs beneath the camera. The thin folded layers appeared beside the archived pre-launch sample. "The structure was already there," he said. Victoria added the metadata showing the formula had been scanned under Mrs. Brooks's visitor code before it was renamed from Nathan's office computer. Then the final registration timeline appeared. Invitation, building entry, legal meeting, file renamed, product filed, launch. Every date moved in one direction. Ruby stood behind Angela, holding the scratched wooden box against her sweater. She looked at the enlarged recipe card on the screen, then at the Lane Foods logo hanging over the stage. Her voice was not loud, but the microphone nearest the evidence table caught it. "That's my mom's recipe." No one coughed. No chair moved. Meredith lowered the program she had been holding like a shield. Harold folded the red-lettered fee envelope once. Then again, his eyes fixed on the floor. The parents who had whispered copycat no longer looked at Caleb's apron or his worn cuffs. They looked at the name missing from the company file. Nathan opened his mouth, but the sentence did not come. His attorney placed a hand over the microphone in front of him. Victoria stepped behind the podium at last. "Lane Foods did not discover this formula," she said. "The company received it from Mrs. Brooks, removed her identifying information, and commercialized it after she refused to surrender ownership without protection or compensation." She paused long enough for the words to settle. Effective immediately, Nathan Cole is suspended from all duties and system access pending independent civil investigation. His financial interests connected to this product are frozen. Every submission processed through the same recruitment program will be audited by outside counsel. Nathan stared toward the exit cameras instead of the room. The silver pen in his hand slipped, struck the table, and rolled until it stopped beside the sealed cake Caleb had insisted the school preserve. Victoria turned to Harold. "The public disclosure of Ruby Brooks's school balance will also be documented for the district board." Then she looked toward Meredith and the original floor plan still taped to the gym wall. And the removal of this family's assigned table will be included in the school's review. Caleb did not watch their faces. He crouched beside Ruby, bringing himself level with her. She released a breath she seemed to have been holding since the first cake hit the floor. He placed one hand over hers on the wooden box. "They know her name now," he said. Ruby looked toward the screen, where her mother's handwritten card filled the wall above them. "Do they have to give it back?" Caleb looked at the card, then at the people waiting to see whether he would demand humiliation in return for humiliation. "They have to make the record true," he said. "Everything else comes after." Victoria approached without the microphone and asked what amount Lane Foods should place into an immediate settlement reserve. Caleb glanced toward the empty food tables, the single remaining sealed cake, and the children waiting outside the gym for the adults to finish. "Before we talk about money," he said, "tell me how many children in this school eat somewhere separate because their lunch account is empty." The silence changed then. It was no longer the silence of people watching a powerful man fall. It was the silence of people realizing Caleb had just been handed power and was already deciding who else it should protect. When the meeting finally ended, no one rushed for the doors. Parents folded their chairs in silence. Teachers stacked tables without the easy conversations that usually followed school events. The evidence remained beneath clear sleeves until the independent attorney signed each chain of custody form and locked the gray recording box inside a transport case. Nathan Cole left through a side exit with his attorney, saying nothing more than his rights would be protected under the investigation. No one cheered when he walked away. Justice had already begun doing what anger never could. Harold Finch remained near the stage long after the crowd had thinned. The red-lettered envelope that once held Ruby's unpaid balance now rested unopened on the evidence table. He walked toward Caleb with both hands visible. "Mr. Brooks," he said quietly, "I violated your daughter's privacy in front of this community. There is no policy that excuses that." Caleb listened without interrupting. "The district has already been notified," Harold continued. "I will complete the corrective review required by the board, and the school will change how student meal balances and activity fees are handled. No child should stand in front of adults carrying that kind of shame." Caleb nodded once. "Good," he replied. "Make sure the next parent never has to hear what Ruby heard." Meredith Collins approached next, no longer wearing the confident smile that had greeted sponsors that morning. She looked at Ruby before speaking to Caleb. "I thought I was protecting standards," she admitted. "I confused money with value." Caleb did not humiliate her. He did not remind her how she had dragged the table across the gym floor. "Children remember where adults place them," he said. "Try placing them better." Meredith lowered her eyes and stepped away. Several weeks later, the district announced she had been removed from her leadership role with the Parent Association through the normal voting process, though she remained welcome as a parent if she followed the same rules as everyone else. Lane Foods released its public findings only after independent investigators completed their review. The company formally recognized Caleb's late wife as the original author of the cinnamon maple recipe in its historical records, future packaging, and corporate archives. Royalties were recalculated through an outside audit rather than private negotiation. Nathan's employment was terminated following the completed investigation, and the matter moved into civil proceedings without spectacle. More important to Caleb than the financial settlement was another announcement Victoria insisted be made on the same day. Every recipe submitted through the old recruitment program would be reviewed for proper attribution, and every future submission would receive a permanent time-stamped ownership record before any evaluation began. When Victoria invited Caleb to headquarters, she did not offer him a title, a publicity campaign, or a photograph for the company website. She placed the restored archive file on the conference table. Caleb opened it slowly. For the first time in years, his wife's full name appeared where it had always belonged, above the recipe instead of erased from it. Victoria waited until he closed the folder. "Money repairs accounts," she said. "Records repair history. You reminded us of the difference." Caleb smiled faintly. "History matters because children read it someday." She extended her hand, not as a benefactor, but as someone acknowledging another professional whose integrity had changed an institution. He shook it once, and nothing more needed to be said. The greatest change arrived quietly at Ruby's school. With support from Caleb, Angela, nutrition staff, and the district, a new lunch program began under a simple sign that read the Ruby Brooks shared table. There were no separate lines, no colored cards, no public reminders about unpaid balances. Every child entered through the same line, received the same tray, and sat wherever friends were waiting. Caleb used part of the royalty settlement to help launch the program, but he insisted it never carry his own name. Ruby shared her last cake before anyone believed us, he told the planning committee. That belongs in the story too. On opening day, he returned to the same gym where the first tray of cakes had fallen. The polished floor reflected the afternoon sunlight instead of harsh fluorescent glare. Ruby walked beside him carrying the old wooden recipe box. The diagonal scratch across its lid remained, and inside rested the original recipe card with its crescent-shaped burn and 3 blue curves beneath the word fold. Once, those marks had looked like signs of poverty and loss. Now they were simply proof that truth can survive smoke, time, and silence if someone is willing to protect it. Before the ceremony began, Caleb removed the original card from the display frame and replaced it with a carefully made copy. Ruby looked up in surprise. "Why take the real one home?" she asked. Caleb placed the original gently back inside the wooden box and closed the lid. "Because memories belong with family," he said. "The lesson belongs with everyone." Later that afternoon, the lunch bell rang. Children laughed as they filled a single line without noticing which meals had been paid for and which had quietly been covered by the shared fund. Caleb tied on the same faded brown apron he had worn at the bake sale and carried fresh cinnamon maple cakes to the serving table. A little boy hesitated at the end of the line, searching his pockets with growing worry. Caleb simply handed him a plate and pointed toward the others. "Same line as everybody else," he said. The boy smiled and ran to join his friends. Caleb watched Ruby disappear into the crowd, no longer hiding worn shoes or an unpaid balance, only carrying the quiet confidence that her mother's name had finally come home. The old recipe card rested safely inside the scratched wooden box, no longer a forgotten piece of paper, but the gentle proof that dignity never needs to raise its voice. It only waits for kindness to become the truth that no one can erase.